Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to open with this verse from the prophet Zechariah, who lived some 5 centuries before Jesus. Rejoice, O people of Zion. Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey's colt. Humble. That's one of the ways we think of Jesus. And so therefore virtuous, because nobody would question that humility is a virtue. Being humble is a good thing. And looking at all of you, I'd say that we have a room full of humble people here. And if humility is a virtue, then there's no doubt that we are a room full of virtuous people, but we're not the only ones. I'm acknowledging our humility, hoping that we will all recognize that in each of our encounters with people at work or where we live or wherever it may be, that humility is universal. Some haven't located their humility, but it's important to acknowledge the reality of humility being universal. And it's okay for you to acknowledge that you are humble. In fact, Jesus says here in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." I know sometimes you hear people joke about being proud of humility, but I think the problem is not being proud of humility. Our problem is being ashamed of humility and pretending it's not there, being embarrassed when it's pointed out. But we do have a problem. We confuse humility with niceness. So we might think that being humble means to be compliant, apologetic, pleasant, perhaps even soft-spoken. So today, if you are none of those things, if you are a loud person, you're going to love what I have to say. If you're a person who does whatever it takes to be seen, whatever it takes to be heard, this is your jam, because we're going to take the pressure off of all the humble people who get the looks that say, tone it down, because we need you. We need one another in all of our diverse manifestations, because we need unbreakable solidarity, the solidarity that comes from intersectionality. That's a word we hear quite a bit of these days. And if you Google intersectionality, you're going to get this. Intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people: gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, etc. And listen, what I'm going to say today is in favor of intersectionality and the people who participate in it, and I'm advocating for them to take up space. One of my former students at St. Stephen's University in Canada, and I have been having a conversation about a completely different kind of intersectionality. Sam is studying the intersectionality of domination. And so I'm going to share a quote, a message that he sent me, and to really get the gist of this, the force of this quote, understand that Sam, over a year ago, resigned from his church's music team because he knew his church would not accept him because he was coming out. He actually came out during the class that I was teaching. He came out as genderqueer, and the class was not related. That particular class was not about gender or sexuality or anything like that, but the mood was so welcoming, and the compassion quotient of the class was so high, they thought this would be a good place. So here's the quote, the message that Sam sent me. Thinking on intersectionality, for me, it is in the authenticity of personhood taken up, that of rejecting a specific privileged position, manhood, that threatens the current social power structures, both patriarchal, but also some feminists, ironically. Those who are becoming free always make those who accept the core narratives of the dominant worried. We make them face the fact that their narrative is just that, made up. And I think the same is true when talking about taking a position rejecting the current social order in favor of radical equality. For domination intersectionality to function, it needs to take up more and more space in the social order. Domination intersectionality needs to be fiercely acquisitive. The intersectionality of domination needs space for collaboration in everything from information technology to education to government, banking, the military, law enforcement, churches, courts. The appointment of a Black woman to the Supreme Court means, at least symbolically, that domination intersectionality loses just a little bit of space, which is why the Domination Collaborative fights so hard to prevent it. The thing that our friend Sam, who I just quoted, the thing that Sam sees is that the intersectionality of domination is immoral, it's illegitimate, but that it's also absurd. Let me illustrate this point of absurdity. Consider that in order to uphold domination, it takes so many players playing so many roles, taking up so much space, so much so that it needs the consent of people who are oppressed. It needs the votes of oppressed people. It needs vocal support of oppressed people. It needs some oppressed people to talk about how proud they are of the world's greatest democracy. The primary way to get oppressed people to support a system that oppresses them is to tell them to play nice. How do we get people to play nice? Well, I'm just going to focus on one example. And that is, one way to get people to play nice is to convince them that they should be more like Jesus and that Jesus was nice. And it covers this absurdity. One example of the absurdity is wealth inequality. One of the most absurd aspects of the intersectionality of domination. To dominate efficiently, not only do they need the consent of the oppressed, they need to keep doing more absurd things to make what used to be absurd appear to be rational and sensible. Some of the richest men in the world are taking up more and more space. They're buying property, they're buying farmland, they're buying commercial properties and residential properties so that people can't afford to rent. So how do you distract from the fact that you are uber wealthy, but you don't pay federal taxes, even though you're a billionaire? What you do is more shameless activity, things that are even more absurd than the last thing. For example, Jeff Bezos wants a moon landing. Elon Musk is planning a mission to Mars. But the prophets have another perspective. Prophets like Greta Thunberg, whose organization produced this.
After more than 5 million years of human existence on Earth, it's time for a change. Mars, 56 million square miles of untouched land, breathtaking landscapes, and incredible views. Sights to see that have never been seen. New adventures we can only dream of. But that's not all. On Mars, there's no war, no criminality, no pandemics, and no pollution. Mars, an untainted planet, a new world where we can begin again. Mars offers the ultimate freedom. Freedom to pave a new path for humans. Freedom to create a new way of life. Freedom to forever change the course of humanity. Will you spend the rest of your years on Earth? Or will you be a pioneer?
So
after more
makes
than
me think of the songs of my youth, long before there was a Greta Thunberg. I think of Marvin Gaye saying, rockets, moonshots, spend it on the have-nots. Money, we make it. Before we see it, you take it. Make me want to holler the way they do my life. Make me want to holler the way they do my life. This ain't living. And then Gil Scott-Heron, whose song said, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bill, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. The man just upped my rent last night because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. And I think of the Grateful Dead's song, Standing on the Moon, where they said, I see all of Southeast Asia. I can see El Salvador. I hear the cries of children and the other songs of war. It's like a mighty melody that rings down from the sky. Standing here upon the moon, I watch it all roll by, all roll by. The intersectionality of domination. Well, the players in this narrative of domination are pretending that they have a right to all the space. It is the theater of the absurd. It's not just the emperor's new clothes. The whole empire is naked. And this is what Jesus came to expose on Palm Sunday long ago. When he rode that donkey into town, it wasn't that he was trying, it wasn't that he was trying to be humble. He was trying to take up space. He rode a donkey because that's what he had access to. Riding into Jerusalem while Jesus was coming into town, in another part of town, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate with horses and troops and full military regalia. Jesus could have been in despair. He could have prayed, Father, I wish I could afford the horses and the powerful entourage. And at that moment in history, everybody knew who Pontius Pilate was. Jesus was not so famous. This this week that was underway, saw Jews coming from 3 continents convening in Jerusalem because it was their Holy Week. They were coming to Jerusalem for Passover. They were not coming to see Jesus. They didn't even know who Jesus was. I'll show you. In Matthew 21, verse 10, says, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, who is this? The crowds answered, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. So the Galileans certainly knew about Jesus because that's where he was from and where he spent nearly all his life. Jesus could have complained, knowing what was going on in the other part of town. Jesus could have complained, oh, if I were in charge. He could have prayed, God, if I was in charge, I would change the world. Well, Jesus was not in charge, but he changed the world anyway. And he didn't need to make nice or be deferent. He was a spectacle. When Jesus rode into town on a donkey, it was both parody and satire. He was laughing at the Roman system. It would become known as Palm Sunday, but on that day, it was also Saturday Night Live. He was showing how absurd Pontius Pilate was, how absurd the hegemony was, how absurd the empire was. In a world of absurdity and imposters, Jesus is real. And I'm telling you today that you have a right to make space for yourself because you are the real deal. And as I conclude, there's a question I'd like for you to ask yourself. And that question is, am I being too nice? And I have this excerpt from a book by Marianne Williamson that perhaps some of you have read or heard, but let me share it with you now. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Let's pray. God of my mother and my father, I come to you alongside my friends here, my humble friends, my virtuous friends. And I thank you that our hearts are open, that the hallmark of this humility is our accessibility. We connect at the level of humanity. And so that means that we welcome all of the people who are stuck play acting in the drama of domination. I pray that you would touch every heart, every one of us. Help us to reach very deeply, and to explore our souls, ourselves, and to see that there's beauty there. And there's beauty in the soul of the person who lives upstairs or down the street. And there's beauty even in those who are trapped in the drama of domination. There's beauty there. There's beauty everywhere. And may we affirm that. May we look for everything beautiful around us. Even in the ashes, may we imagine a rising. Even in the concrete, may we imagine a rose. May we look for the beauty around us and within us so that we will have no compunction about letting our light shine and taking up space when we should be doing this. Amen. I think Lisa's on. Do we not have Lisa?
I'm here. It's just hard to talk because I'm running with a puppy.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of, you know what? I haven't sorted my thoughts out yet.
Somebody want to
But I
jump
think-
in?
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
think people are trapped. I think people are trapped in what they know. I think the unknown scares people in that, hey, you know what, let's try a different way. And I think there's so many people who I talk to and I tell them things about, you know, the hypocrisy of the church and stuff like that, and the hypocrisy of the groups that they're involved in that call themselves Christian, and they just aren't ready to deal with it.
Amen.
It just happened like this week. I even mentioned some of it, and they're just like, they can't deal with it.
Wow. They can't deal with it. And yet we pray. I see a hand. That must be Rosie.
Rosie.
We see your hand. We
Yes.
don't see your face, but we see your hand.
Yeah, okay, my phone keeps falling. I want to say that, you know, it takes learning is requires utilizing our brain muscle, right? And just like, you know, with everything else, you know, there are, I think, going along with what Lisa was just sharing, that there are just too many people who have been caught up in the lies and talk about misinformation, that they're too lazy, you know, to learn the truth, to question authority. You know, it goes along with what the speaker, you know, had said, I don't know, like 2-3 weeks ago about, well, you know, we're like, you know, 500 years into this, you know, colonization of myth and lies, you know, religiously, that it's just easier, I think, for too many people to go along with it, and rather than to question it.
Yes. Let me ask everybody if anybody today, after hearing this, feels encouraged to feels your authority, your right to take up more space.
Well, I do. It's so funny because I'm a more reserved, soft-spoken person, and I work with children. And your thing about, you know, that I can't remember. I had it written down, but now I can't remember how you said it about children, about how we need to shine like children, and that us kind of taking up our space encourages others to take up space. And that was very encouraging to me, because I would never ever stifle a child, but I stifle myself all the time. So I just am so encouraged by that, because I want to do the same thing for myself that I do for kids. So thank you for that.
I like this. I like this. Anybody else? Ready to do the child thing, ready to take up space, ready to shine.
I was just thinking, I remember my mother always used to tell me that there's a difference between being nice and being kind. And being nice is like a sort of social affectation, and that's when you're doing what you're supposed to do. And then being kind is more like a sort of honest expression. So when you were saying like people are sort of feel like they're encouraged to be nice, like I was like, yeah, that makes sense. People are encouraged to sort of be polite and give the right aspect that other people want to see. I don't know. That's sort of what I was thinking of.
Yeah, you make me think of my Canadian friends who say, yeah, we have a reputation for being nice, but don't let that fool you.
It just means they can hide it pretty well.
Right, right. Anybody else taking up space? Maybe you don't even know where you're going to be taking up space next, but you know you're just a little bit readier to take it.
What happens with the people, Pastor? Did you get, it's not a matter of taking up space or being nice or having a voice, but when, well, for me personally, I am just getting angrier every time I turn on the television and look at what's happening. And, you know, I'm joining with the Pope's frustration and looking at what's happening in the world. And it seems that everybody is just sitting around talking about it and not able to do anything about it, or not willing to. Where do you go from there?
You know, you think about Vladimir Putin taking up space, feeling entitled to be able to take up more space at other people's expense, and that's illegitimate. That's what I meant when I said that there are people taking up space. The domination, intersectionality, taking up space because they feel entitled to it. But the thing is that is fraudulent, and really there are people who need to take up space, who need to take up space, even if it seems overlooked and only symbolic. It needs to happen. Sometimes you feel as a protester, and protest is done on the streets and behind the scenes, but we feel maybe as a protester that we don't have the power. We're not the ones that can create change. I mean, we don't have the money. We don't have the influence. We don't own the press. So why are we doing this? And that's what Jesus was showing us, is that, I got nothing, but I'm going to use what I have. And we need to feel that freedom to recognize that we can change things. We can make a difference, even though we don't have those resources that we've been told that we have to have those resources in order to effect change. And that's a delusion.
This thing is sort of random, but in England, there's a huge scandal just brewing right now about how incredibly wealthy most of the people at the top of the government are, and how a lot of them have registered in the past as non-domiciled, so none of them were actually paying taxes on the vast amounts of money they were making. And it's just, I don't know how this ties into what we're talking about, but I just keep thinking about it. Like,
well, I think it's pretty manifest. It's absurd. It's absurd to be part of the human family, and to feel like you're entitled to everything whereas they're entitled to not being able to pay rent. You know,
Right.
they're entitled to hold 2 jobs and need public assistance. And they're actually contributing to your wealth because they do pay taxes. It's absurd. And the system wants to try to get us to try to make it make sense.
Mhm.
You know, like, this is the way it is. This is logical. No, it's not logical. It's inhumane. Who should be taking up space right here in Santa Barbara County? The Chumash. Scott, you have something?
Yeah, when you mentioned protests, I was recalling once hearing that Jesus on a donkey riding into town, into Jerusalem, people laying down the palms was pure protest for a lot of theologians, and mockery of Caesar, literally a mockery of Caesar. And the other thing that comes to mind is the Gospels referring, and Jesus himself refers phrase of being the Son of God. And that was, if I have it right, you'll correct me if I don't, David, that was a phrase for Caesar as well, as Caesar held, and I'm thinking of the root of the word humility, and I think it's humus, it's the same root for humor. And it is interesting that it ultimately means being close to the ground. And anyway, it's I get a sense that if you are grounded, you're going to get in somebody's way and pick up space that they don't want you to be in. And of course, a number of us have had that experience at a military base of being removed from the space that we were taking up. But anyway, it's just it's again, I think it's Jesus being radical, and at least the gospel portraying him as being radical. I mean, really in the face of Caesar and the system. And as far as I'm concerned, we're living in an empire too, and in many ways, except that's the empire that we want to help and love and change. And I think Jesus did the same thing. He wanted to, he didn't want to end. He loved Jerusalem and he loved his people and his state, and he just wanted to get them back on track.
Yeah, and the system tries to embarrass anybody who doesn't play by the rules. It tries to shame, the system shames, the horrible abuse that Simone Biles got and Naomi Osaka for saying, I'm going to take care of myself. No, hey, wait a minute, come back over here. You're obligated to make our system work, and you don't have the right to go and make space for yourself. But we do. We're capital, this capitalist driven empire will ask everything of you and let a couple of people come through, a percentage of people come through and succeed and tell you to look at them and how well they did and what's wrong with you. And so shame comes on you for not performing, not excelling within the system selfishly, when there are other people who are giving themselves away, giving their time away, making space for themselves so that they can make space for others, which is what Scott, you're talking about, what you're doing in protest. You're making space for yourself, not just for yourself, but for a whole other way of thinking.
I think the whole sort of dominion thing can feel so overwhelming. It's like, crushing, I guess that's the whole point, but it feels very crushing right now.
And that's what we can't give into. I so relate to that, Caroline. That's what we can't give into. This is what faith is about. Faith is about seeing the unseen, envisioning the impossible. And that's why we're here. We're here to exercise faith. think of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount saying, let your light so shine before people so they may see your good works, and instead of you shrinking and hiding, saying, oh, shucks, make sure they see your good